How is it going, guys? And welcome back to a new episode here with some pot limit Omaha content. Jumping straight into the action on GG Poker, playing two tables of Russian cash. Table number one, Ace Queen 10-9 single. Gonna 3-bet this one, big blind against a small blind steal. Flopping top two pair on a very draw heavy board. I like to check back this hand. This is one of those medium strong hands that if I bet I get raised, I'm in a very tough spot. And if I bet I get called, pretty much the same holds true, I would say. So pot controlling, taking the action to the turn. On the turn, my opponent checks, and I think now I have a pretty good candidate to turn my hand into a bluff. Blocking the 10 and the 9, I'm blocking the best boats, of course. And on the flop, when you think about my range, I will definitely check back some 9-7, 10-7, 9-9. So I will have boats on the turn. Therefore, I will need to find bluffs, and I think this is one of the best ones to go for. On the river, I don't have any showdown value pretty much anymore, so potting I think is the play. My opponent makes the fold, and that's how we start this session, guys. Two tabling. If you do like my content, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And also check out plomastermind.com if you want to learn more about the great game of pot limit Omaha, not only by myself, but also by other PLO professionals. Guys, let's see what this session is all about. We are again back in the PLO 50 streets, two tabling. And on table number 2, Queen 10 and 7 triple. This is a bit too loose to consider open raising, so I will make the fold. And on table number 1, I think this is a pretty decent candidate to come in for a steal, especially against players who are on the tighter end, which seems to be the case on this table. If you look into the VPIP of all the 4 players, they are 20 or below. And therefore, holding 2 high blockers basically is pretty good, I would say. Ace, Queen, Jack 10 rainbow could be an open from under the gun, but it depends on the table dynamics. If you have players who play a ton of hands, then the value definitely drops a bit because we open raise the hand primarily also to try and get folds pre-flop. So let's see if this session will have some interesting hands. Table number 1, folding King 10 9 5. I think that is that's okay. Jack 10 5 5 double. Table number 2, definitely a fold from under the gun. I would start raising that hand basically from, I think from the cutoff, I would say. King, Queen, Queen 7 rainbow. One of the most weakest queens I basically open raise with on the button. But with the king, it's pretty good actually. So yeah, guys, hope you enjoyed this session. Let me know down below, what have you recently been playing? What games are you in for at the moment? And also, if you have any questions about my session, of course, feel free to use the comment section below. Table number 1, open raising ace, 8-8-6. Checking the flop to check call. I think that's pretty standard. And on table number 2, this is a reasonable candidate to come in for a squeeze. I think calling is also okay. Doesn't matter as much, especially when you think that your opponents are not gonna fold against the squeeze. The value of the squeeze will definitely drop a bit. Although I do think that this one is probably still a standard squeeze. So calling a little bit more on the tight end, I would say. Anyway, let's get into it. King 10 9 deuce triple. In the small blind, I would consider raising this up against the big blind who seems to be a bit tight. And at the same time, I do have like 3 high cards, right? The king, the 10, the 9. Definitely blocking some of my opponent's continues, basically. I do bet. My opponent makes the call. Interesting turn. Turning trips. Betting half pot. It's a little bit on the smaller end, I would say. I could bet larger to charge draws a bit more. Put Queen X into a difficult spot there. And on the river, I think checking is the play with so many straights coming in. And I would say with the missed flush draw, blocking Jack 10, 10-7, don't think my opponent necessarily will bet Jack 10 or 10-7 for full pot, but it will play a bit of a role. I decide to call down. My opponent shows up with ace, queen, 9-5. Very strong hand. Table number 2. I open raise and face a 3-bet. Flopping middle pair and a gutter. With a spade, I would consider betting at this point. Without a spade, I like a check back more. We will have a bit less fold equity, basically. And at the same time, like if I check back, I can realize my equity. There are a lot of 2 pairs I can hit. I have a 10, of course, for the nut straight. I basically like to play that way and see a turn first before making another play. Table number 1, I decided to go for a delay c-bet. My opponent raised, and I have a very standard fold there. Table number 2, king, queen, jack, 10. No, king, queen, jack, deuce, double suited. Pretty strong flop, top pair. Flush draw, nut gutter, definitely betting. I think anywhere from half pots to, I go a bit smaller, which is also okay. But half pot, I think, usually would be my default sizing there. Turn is the ace. Gonna check. Plenty of outs to hit on the river. I don't want to bet and get erased, basically. And on the river, I have a very easy value bet with the second nuts, basically. Half pot, blocking the king and the jack. I think that's okay. Trying to get called by a hand like ace-9, ace-jack, like something like that. Ace-queen-10, like those kind of things. And on table number 1, very standard open raise with king-king, queen-10 single. Let's see what will happen there. This is a pretty good strong hand, obviously, and against a button call on queen 10 deuce with a flush draw. I could check and check raise. I could bet and get the money in on the flop. Betting this sizing and getting called, like things become a little bit tricky on the turn quite often. But looking at the VPIP of my opponent, like he plays a wide range of hands, it seems. And therefore, I do like betting more than checking, which is my default against the majority of players, basically. But once the pre-flop calling range becomes wider, like my range advantage on a board like queen 10 deuce increases significantly, and therefore I will, or I can basically bet more often on the flop. That's what I'm trying to say. My opponent has ace 6-5-5, turning the ace with the nut flush draw on the flop already. And we do take it down, which is nice. Table number 2. Not entirely sure what happened, but let's move on to the next hand. King, queen, 8-5, pretty standard fold. And on table number 1, probably a defend against the button steal or a small blind steal. But they do make the fold, and we just take down the pot without having to play. Okay, let's see. Table number 2, king 9, 7-7. I like a fold. My opponent raises from under the gun. Even though I have like a pair and a king high suit, I'd rather have a bit more connection or being double suited, for example. I think that is already a lot more reasonable. Let's open up PLO Trainer for a minute and take a look into this sort of basic situation, but very, very important in my opinion, and that is defending the big blind pre-flop. Now, defending the big blind pre-flop heavily depends on the opponent that you're facing and the amount of hands that he's raising with. So if you face a player who open raises from early position and he raises roughly 18% of hands, then in the big blind we are only supposed to call 15.2%. So that is not many hands, right? So very tight, and 3-betting only 4.1%. Now, if we would change this setup and adjust the player that we're facing and the range that he's open raising with, so let's imagine we face a raise from a player on the button, we now can call 27% and 3-bet 9.5%. So both of the ranges pretty much double. In other words, you have to adjust tremendously based on the range that you are facing. Now, if we take a look into this 15% calling range, then there are many hands that might feel surprising that we are folding. So if we take a look, for example, into king-king, then king-king in the big blind against an under-the-gun raise is actually folding 18.9%. A A hand like king, king, 8 deuce, for example, on the left side might feel like a very standard call because you still have kings, but against a tight range, it will be very difficult to realize the equity out of position in this spot against a tight range. Let's take a look into the hand that I was holding, king 9 7 7. Double suited calling is fine, but all the other variations, as I also pointed out in the video, are supposed to be a fold on the left side. Ace queen 7 7. This will be a raise on table number 1. And jack 8 6 5 triple. Table number 2 will be a fold. Let's see. Button is thinking about it, but he does go out of the way. Small blind makes the call. Small blind plays 58 VPIP. So what usually happens is that the small blind is at least supposed to have like a very tight calling range against almost any raise basically from another position. But this player obviously doesn't. And whenever that changes, basically, like my strategy will also change if we play, for example, one-on-one. Basically meaning that I will bet more often on many of the flops, especially if they are high card heavy, because my range will be in a larger advantage than it would usually be when he has like a very tight calling range. Table number 2, pretty loose open on my end. But we have 2 tight players in the blinds, so it can never be that bad. But against a 3-bet and a 4-bet, of course, very easy fold. And on table number 1, I like a fold. It's a bit too weak, I would say. Which is luckily what I do. And table number 2, folding against a min raise. I think it's okay. Table number 1 is interesting. Ace-Jack 4-4. We do have a few tight players, but also a few that are not super tight. So I like the fold a bit more. But always from under the gun, keep in mind, how are the table dynamics? What are your opponents? What is their playing style, basically? And adjust accordingly if needed. Ace, Queen, Queen, Jack. Strong hand. I think calling is the play. If we 3-bet and face a 4-bet, we have to fold. While we are in position, we have a very nutted hand, playing well against multiple players if the blinds call as well. This hand being unsuited to the ace would be a pretty decent combo to 3-bet. Basically turning your hand sort of into a semi-bluff pre-flop. Especially if you know that your opponent is capable of folding kings, for example, when you 3-bet. That is great because we unblock king, king. Table number 1, I lead out flop, I bet turn, and I will also bet on the river. Let's see. Turning a boat, my opponent makes a fold. Table number 2, I bet flop and get called. And now on this turn, I will check when all those straights will come in. And we do lose against king, king, queen, 6. Like, that's a very light peel on the flop against my bet, especially with one player behind. Button against early position, I'm supposed to 3-bet 5.6% and call 10.6% of the time. So a tight calling range and a relatively tight 3-betting range, obviously because I'm up against a strong open raising range. Now in the video I mentioned that ace, queen, queen, jack suited to the ace is a hand that I'm supposed to call, which is what I did. But let's investigate this a little bit further by opening up the categories to understand my 3-betting range a bit better. I was holding a 1-pair single suited hand, which is listed in the middle 11% of the time. I'm 3-betting this hand class. Aces, no surprise, always 3-betting. But I'm holding a Broadway pair, and Broadway pairs are 3-betting 8% only. So a big distinction between having aces or any other Broadway pair, first of all. And next up, let's take a look into the separation here. With an ace-high suited hand, we are actually still 3-betting 43%, which is quite high in my opinion, and higher than I was expecting. If we have an ace-high off-suited hand, we are 3-betting more often, 55%, but the difference is not as large as I was expecting it to be. So first, let's open up the top one. If we have a single suited hand with an ace-high suit, on the right side, we can see all the variations that we are 3-betting. Let's start off with the best one, which is Ace King King. Ace King King is 3-betting roughly 50-50. What we see is that in the middle with a triple suited variation, we are most of the time calling. And on the right side with a single suited variation, we are mainly 3-betting. Now let's remove Ace Ace from the filter and take a look into Ace Queen Queen. Because to my surprise, we can actually see that many of the Ace Queen Queen variations suited to the ace are still going to be put into our 3-betting range. And it's like Ace Queen Queen 10, but also Ace Queen Queen Jack, the variation that I was holding in game, is actually a 3-bet in theory. In the middle, we see the calls, the triple suited ones, and if we have a wheel card, basically a deuce, a 3, a 4, or a 5. But other than that, we are pretty much 3-betting these variations always. Now let's, before jumping into one other thing, let's take a look into the other hand class, which is the one unsuited to the ace. And here we see that we don't really like to call anymore, only 13%, because calling is not that great if we have a non-knotted hand. So we suddenly start to folding a lot, and the remaining ones are pretty much being put into our 3-betting range. Ace Queen Queen, unsuited to the ace, is pretty much always gonna be a 3-bet here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if we 3-bet in this solution, that the early position player is supposed to fold 36% of the time and also fold kings 52.7%. And that is, of course, a great result if I would 3-bet my hand in game, Ace, Queen, Queen, Jack, suited to the ace. If I fold kings so often, that is great. Now, in reality, that's not always what's happening. People might underfold, and therefore some of the value gets lost out of your 3-bet. But if your opponent, for example, is making mistakes post-flop or he is open raising with a wider range, then I think 3-betting should still be the play. So probably a mistake on my end in game. My hand should have been a 3-bet instead of the call. 3-betting, ace, ace, 10, 5, single, table number 2. Flopping top set, ace, 9, deuce. I'm going to bet 2/3 pot or so on this board, probably with my full range or close to my full range. Let's see if my opponent will continue, which he unfortunately doesn't. So we do take it down. And on table number 1, flopping in gutter and a backdoor flush draw. Interesting spot. Probably a call if he would bet on flop. But he checks back. Turning. Turn is a 7. Let's see. My opponent bets half pot. Now, I do believe that once my opponent checks back on the flop, a lot of his like 2 pairs and better are removed from his range. Sizing is a little bit capped, I would say, or it looks a bit weaker in a sense. So I go ahead and check raise. Try to put pressure on like maybe a random ace that he decided to check back the flop with and bet. Of course, he will also have some bluffs that I am still ahead of, but that can realize their equity if I would call. I don't want to fold there. Turning the flush draw. So I turn my hand into a bluff by check raising, and he does get out of the way. So that's a good result. Table number 2, ace, king, 8, 4. Standard open from middle position. And on this flop, I'm going to check back up against 2 players. I don't have a ton of equity or strong blockers. So let's just pot control. And I think we will have to let this one go even though we have top pair. River will be very tricky. Table number 1 is very interesting. Flopping an overpair and a gutter with a spade blocker, which is the nut flush draw blocker. So let's see what I do. I'm betting full pot, which I think is okay. Can never be super bad. But it's interesting. It's an interesting spot for sure what the flop decision there should be. My opponent gets out of the way, and I do take that one down. While on table number 2, this is I think a raised pot. I check flop, and I will go ahead and check call. While on table number 1, calling against an under the gun raise. Pretty standard, I would say, on the button. Let's see. Still using the screenshots, as you guys can see. Marking hands to review after my session. Table number 2, easy check call on the turn as well. Table number 1, I check back the flop. I think that's the play without any pair blocker really or made hand. We still have decent equity. I want to see a turn. We can turn also some straight draws like here, which is what we do by the gutter. And once my opponents check again, I do like to take a stab on the turn. I think their ranges by now are very capped. And I have no showdown value yet, but I do have equity and I pick up equity. So I think it's a great spot actually to take a stab. My opponents fold. And I do take it down. Table number 2. Open raising. Beautiful hand. And we face a 3-bet by a short stack player. I think this is going to be a 4-bet at this SPR. Flopping the straight. Beautiful. Beautiful flop. 71% equity. What does my opponent have? He actually has top set, blocking middle set as well. Let's see if we can win this one. Let's see if we can win this one. Guys, good turn. Beautiful river. Ship it. Nice. Taking that one down. Not too bad. Not too bad. Table number 1. I call a raise. And I have a very easy bet on this flop with all my blockers. It's sort of a mix between value and equity denial and blockers. Like so many things going on that I have a pretty clear bet there. Table number 2 will be an open raise, even though it's a pretty marginal ace high hand. Like being double suited, I think open raising is definitely the play. Ace king queen. I like a check. It's a bit too weak, I would say, to bet. Although my opponent plays like a wide VPIP, so betting could even be okay for, let's say, half pot. But I don't mind the check back, to be honest. Table number 1, open raising. It's okay, but it's not a great hand. This hand can definitely easily be sort of overvalued from under the gun. Yes, we have queens with a king, but we still have 5 players behind us to act. We have to fold always against a squeeze or a 3-bet, so it's not that great of a hand, to be honest. And king 8, 6, 5 against an under the gun raise by a 30 big blind player. I decide to fold, which I think is okay. Cut off against an early position raise at 100 big blinds. We are supposed to call 6.5%. So very tight and not that many hands. However, when stacks become more shallow, in other words, the stack sizes drop, our calling range will change quite a bit. So if we move into the 50 big blind solution, cutoff versus early position, we're only calling 3.5%. So that is a significant drop. Now, if we drop down even further to 30 big blinds, which is what happened in the hand in my video, basically, the calling frequency drops to 0.9%. So we are almost never calling anymore. Only a very select group of hands is capable of calling like 8-8, 7-7. King, king, 3-3, or a hand like queen, queen, 7-7. But a hand like king 8, 6-5 double is therefore a clear fold. Let's take a look into a 100 big blind solution. Is king 8, 6-5 double strong enough to make the call there? The answer is yes. But the EV is very minimal, so don't expect much to win if you do decide to call at 100 big blind. Table number 2, king, king, 8, 4 double. Pretty good hand. Especially big blind against the button steal. This guy also seems to play a lot of hands, 48 VPIP. Very easy 3-bet. Which is what we are doing. He is actually min raising. Beautiful flop. Flopping is straight with a lot of backup. Betting small. We could check and check raise. We could bet and take it from there, unblocking all the pairs. I like a bet a bit more, but I think checking is definitely okay for sure. We face a small raise. I decided to raise. Interesting. Opponent folds. I don't know. Maybe I should just call there with all that backup that I have. And table number 1. I think I call a flop bet. And then my opponent checks on the turn. River pair. Very bad river. My opponent will have plenty of queen jack or better. He has queens. Yeah, the turn bet is, I think it's okay, but probably depends on who you're playing, I would say. Checking there, I would say, is the standard. Couple of nice hands. Aces on the right. On the left side, a gutter and 2 backdoor flush draws. I like a bet. Table number 2, I also like a bet with my pair blocker and backdoor nut clubs. Turn is the 5. Yeah, I like a bet. I like a bet. Getting raised becomes very tricky, but there are just too many hands I'm still ahead of. Because the 5 will not improve him that often on a disconnected board like this. And I do win against King King 9-3. So some additional value there by betting the turn. Light call by my opponent. And on table number 2, this is one of those hands that I like to 3-bet with. Similar as I discussed earlier, this is actually a hand that is unsuited to the ace. And against an under the gun raise, we need to find like some 3-bet bluffs, right? Because we are 3-betting a ton of very strong hands like aces, ace high double suited rundowns. And I think this is a reasonable candidate. We are a bit deeper though. And on King 7-5 with a flush draw, I'm going to check back. I have some showdown value and equity that I want to realize. If I bet and get raised, it's going to be very tricky. And I also don't block anything really on the board. I don't have a strong mate hand yet. So let's just check and take it from there. Not a good turn, not for my hand, also not for my range. And against this large sizing, I think we just have to fold, unfortunately. Table number 1, flopping a pair and a nut gutter. Pretty interesting. I would say if my opponents check to me, I'm going to take a stab. But against a pot size bet with 3 players behind me, I will have to fold. It just is what it is. Ace 10, 6, 5 on the right side. We are a little bit deeper than 100 big blinds, but I would say this is still a 3-bet double suited. I'm using the 150 big blind solution and try to understand whether this hand was actually a 3-bet or not. We are 3-betting 8.9% from the big blind against a button steal at this stack depth. Now this is a little bit deeper than we were actually in reality, but if we take a look into the categories and focus on unpaired double suited hands with an ace, this hand class is 3-betting 48% of the time. Now a connected Broadway hand with an ace is always 3-betting. And if we take a look into my specific hand class, let's find it. First of all, we have the connected non-Broadway hand class. But my hand falls into the disconnected with 2 Broadways. So 33% of the time we are 3-betting. I'm opening up this hand class. We can see hands like ace king 5-4 double. Ace king 8-7 double. So a lot of ace king, it seems to be. So if I filter for ace king, like this hand class is 3-betting 57%. Let's remove ace king. We'll see some ace queen variations. Ace queen 5-4, ace jack 8-5 double. What about ace 10? With ace 10, we are 3-betting with a hand like ace 10 7-5, ace 10 8-5. But ace 10 6-5 is actually very mixed. 3-betting is okay, but it's not printing. Calling is a little bit higher frequency. Mixing here is fine. If your opponent is playing too many hands, then 3-betting becomes more attractive. If your opponent open raises a little bit tighter than he probably should, then I think calling here is better. And on ace king 9, I'm going to bet very often. This is a good board for my range. And my weakest ace X hands, like this one, are pretty much like my sort of bet folds. I still have the ace blocker, so I will block a good amount of my opponent's continues. This time he does raise, and I will have to let it go. But that's fine, right? Like on a board like that, I will have plenty of strong hands, and if my opponent there raises, like we can get it in really well. Ace king queen deuce on the left. It's a raise on a tie table, I would say. Otherwise not. Queen 10 7 5 double. Table number 2. This is a think it's an okay raise, but it's not that great of a hand. It's not that great of a hand, I would say. It's easy to overvalue a hand like that. You're quite gappy. You still have like marginal suits, right? Easy check on the flop. Well, on table number 1, we do call down on the river. And taking the pot down against the king of heart blocker. Table number 2, check, check, flop, check, 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 turn. Like your lowest or weakest flushes, you want to take them to a later street to either value bet or try to induce a bluff. Like if you bet on an early street, like ranges become too narrow to considering to bet more often, basically. You can't bet the queen high flush for more than one street, probably. So checking, inducing a bluff there, and taking also down that one, which is nice. And on table number 1, ace queen 4 deuce double against a 65 VPIP, very short stack player. I decide to 3-bet. How much big blinds does he have? He has a little bit over 20 big blinds. So screenshotting this, trying to analyze that one after. Good flop to get it in. And my opponent folds, which is a great result. Rather have him fold than getting the money in. Table number 2, king, queen, jack, jack. Good hand to open raise with. And we do take one more down. King, king, 8-6. On the button will be an open raise, will be a call against a single raise. And it will also be a call against a 3-bet if I would face a 3-bet here. Which happens, like this player plays fairly tight, 16 VPIP, so need to be a bit careful post-flop. But against a half pot size bet, top pair and an overpair, 1 diamond, I would say this is a standard call. See a turn and then basically deciding what to do next. Beautiful flop, by the way, on table number 1. Flopping the nut boat. Against the half pot size bet, I'm just going to call, keep my opponent's range wide, keep his bluffs in. We can still raise on a later street pretty much. This is the jack. Let's see what my opponent will do. Against a very large bet, I will just call again, most likely. And against the check, I mean, we must bet here. Only question is what sizing. I think anything from like 3/4 pot to full pot is fine. Like I don't want to go smaller because I will not value bet like a hand like Queen X at this point. Like if I bet, I will polarize quite a bit. I could sometimes bet like aces if I decided to flat that. But even aces could value bet on the turn for like 3/4 pot probably. So I bet, or I bet he calls, and now on the river he leads out on the jack. Which is very interesting. I mean, obviously, we're just going to get the money in because we have pretty much the nuts, unless you have jack, jack, or 4-4. And on table number 2, I do take this one down against a missed gutter. Table number 1, he is thinking about it. I wonder, like, what he can pot size lead out with on the river. Ace Jack even doesn't make too much sense. Could be at like, I don't know, like Jack 4, but how, I don't know. Like it's a weird spot. It feels like a weird spot, to be honest. Table number 2, limped pot. Just checking. Try to get the showdown. While on table number 1, my opponent ended up folding. And on table number 2, I do win against 9-5-5-4. Open raising queen 8-7 for double. It's okay. And on this turn, I will bet his range is more capped after he checks back the flop. I pick up equity, but I also don't have showdown value. So it's a good time to start betting and trying to take it down. King, queen, jack 6 on the right side will be an open raise. And ace, king, queen, jack, triple on the left. This must be a 3-bet against the button, I would say. Even though we are triple suited, like with 4 Broadway cards, including an ace, I do want a 3-bet. Small blind makes the call on table number 2. And that is a pretty bad flop for my hand. My opponent leads out, and I have a very easy fold. Queen, jack, 10 deuce, table number 2. I will open raise this one. Who is sitting on my left? Well, we got a player in the small blind is only sitting on 12, 14 big blinds, which is not that great. But we still have a raise with this hand, I would say. A pair, gutter, flush draw, backdoor flush draw. Just bet it. And take it from there. Table number 1, I mean, the open raise and the call versus 3-bet is questionable, I would say. I mean, we have 2 tight players, so I think open raising is not that bad. But against a 3-bet, I'm not sure if this is actually correct. Flopping a pair and an open-ended, I think we will have to bet this hand. We're stacking just so many blockers here, or 2 very powerful blockers while we have equity, and we are probably behind my opponent's hand at this point. That this will be a good hand to bet and then triple off on a lot of runouts. I can value bet here like ace 3, 3-6, some sets. So I will have plenty of value, and therefore I will need to find bluffs. On the button, at 100 big blinds, I am supposed to open raise 49.3%. And my specific hand, king 10, 5-3 single suited on the left side, is actually supposed to be a fold. Only open raising the double suited variation. So pre-flop, my raise is too wide. Now, one thing to pay attention to is if we have the king high suit. So let me filter for that combination. Then the EV difference is only 0.03, so very minimal. And therefore, if the blinds would, for example, overfold or under 3-bet, this might be ending up in reality to be a slight profitable open raise. But anyway, very marginal, and you have to be careful in this instance myself. Anyway, if I open raise and then face a 3-bet, I decided to call. Let's take a look into a similar hand. If we have that, we have a hand that is unpaired. It is single suited. We don't have an ace. And we do have a king in this instance. And 80% of the time we are supposed to call. You can see that in the middle. Now, what are hands that we are folding? Let's first of all take a look into if we have the king high suit, because that's what we had. Hands like king jack 9-6 are a fold. Hands like king 10 8-4 is a fold. King jack 8-6. So it looks to me that my hand also against a 3-bet is probably just going to be a fold, actually. So a bit too loose pre-flop, both as the raise as well as facing the 3-bet. Now on the flop, what I do want to take a look into is, first of all, my opponent is only c-betting, at least in theory, 3.6%. And therefore, this tells us something that this board is not that good for his range. And that makes sense, right? Like he's 3-betting about 9% and primarily going to be high cards, high pairs, which will not connect to this board. While at the same time, my button open raising range will have a bit more made hands on this flop because I will open raise roughly 50% of hands. So once my opponent checks, and I have a decision to make in position, I'm taking a step 49% of the time if I would use half pot. In game, I bet 1/3 pot, which allows me to bet a little bit more frequently. If we take a look into my hand, king 10, 5-3, then this hand is actually supposed to be a check back, only betting potentially with 2 backdoor flush draws. Now, to understand this pattern a little bit better, if I filter for top pair with an open-ended straight draw, which is pretty much the hand class I'm holding. With this hand class, in theory, we are supposed to bet if we have 6-7, so the nut open-ender. This is a pure bet. Now, the other hand class that we are betting very often is if we have an ace, because then we are blocking ace-ace. That quite often will come, for example, with a straight draw or a pair to the board, and therefore will not fold. So by blocking this, we will make it more likely our opponent will not have ace-ace and therefore fold against the stab. If I remove the ace, then the other thing that we can see is that we need a 6 to bet. We're being more nutted. In this instance, we have, for example, queen 8, 6, 5. So we have a open-ended to the nut side of the board. And if we remove this, then we're pretty much left with pure check. So a bit too much aggression on my end, at least if we compare it to the theory solution. Now, if we expect our opponents to under defend versus stab, not check raise enough, but also overfold, then I think stabbing quickly becomes more profitable. I don't hate my play, but I think this is sort of an eye-opener to be aware of what types of hands we are supposed to stab with in position. And on table number 1, this will be a call against a 3-bet. My opponent is a bit shorter, which is something to keep in mind. But still a call and still an open. Versus half pot. Like, I don't want to raise. I think I can still call, right? Pair, 2 backdoor flush draws, gutter. Yeah, it's a bit too strong to fold, I would say. Check call. And on this turn, unfortunately, we have to let it go. It's a good board, of course, for my opponent's range. But my hand still plays the way it plays there, I would say. Ace 10, 8, 3. Suited to the ace, single. Let's see. It's tempting to call on the right with the ace-high suit, but in theory, a hand like that, I would say is a fold. It's just too disconnected, and especially against an early position raise. We have to be so tight there. 9, 9, 7, 7 single. Just call. Double suited, 3 betting could be okay. And against a, what is this? This is a min 3 bet, almost a min 3 bet. We just have a call. Easy fold on jack 5 deuce. Table number 2, taking down the pot pre-flop. Small blind against the big blind. Let's see, ace 7, 5, 4 double. We are 150 big blinds deep. I decide to 3 bet. This is interesting. I wonder if this is a 3 bet in theory. Like, we are usually 3 betting with side cards that are a bit higher. And against the 4 bet, we are in a very tricky spot. Like, the thing is, the 3 side cards are pretty reasonable because they are sort of low, which doesn't interact with my opponent's 4 betting range. And therefore, they are sort of more alive. I'm also double suited, so calling is okay, but it's not great. Interesting pre-flop 3 bet. Let's take a look whether this makes any sense. Well, the first thing to pay attention to is that the 3 betting range at 150 big blinds increases to 9.8% on the top right, which is quite a bit. Now, I want to take a look into the categories and focus on the unpaired double suited hands that do have an ace. 30% of the time we are 3 betting. If we have an ace, this increases to 48%. Now, connected Broadway, 90% 3 bet. If we have a connected non-Broadway hand, this hand class is 3 betting 66%. Opening this one up, because here we will find also the hand that I decided to 3 bet with. On the top right, we have the very best ones, ace 10, 9, 8 double, ace jack 8, 7 double, so all strongly connected ones. Scrolling down a bit and try to find whether there is also the hand ace 7, 5, 4. In the 3 betting range, we have ace 7, 6, 4. We have ace 9, 8, 6. Let's filter for ace 7, 5, 4. And this hand is supposed to be a 3 bet in theory at 150 big blinds. So that decision is correct. Let's take a look into the EV difference. And the EV difference is quite substantial, like 0.38 big blinds, basically 38 big blinds per 100. So quite a large difference. So important to make this 3 bet. Now what I do want to do is want to compare it to the 100 big blind solution. So I'm going to open this 100 big blind solution up, cut off against the button raise. First of all, we can see that we are only 3 betting 8.7%, so significantly less often. An ace 7, 5, 4 double suited is still a 3 bet, which is a little bit surprising to me. I would have thought that we need a little bit higher side cards. This is a 3-bet still. EV is dropping to 0.85. And the EV difference is also dropping. So calling becomes a bit more appealing, basically, when the stacks become less deep. Now, if we 3-bet and my opponent 4-bets at 150 big blinds, I do want to take a look into the folding range on the left side. Hands like ace, king, 6 deuce, ace, king, king, deuce. Like especially hands with a pocket pair, they usually play pretty bad because they are dominated by aces so heavily. So having a pair in your hand usually is not that great for continuing. Now, if I have a hand without a pair that is double suited, and where we do have an ace, then we still see some folds on the left side. So the ace in our hand is actually not that great because the ace very often will sort of be useless if our opponent has ace-ace. So we prefer to have a hand without an ace, actually. If we compare this having an ace with not having an ace, then if we don't have an ace, we are always calling. While if we do have an ace, then we have a folding range of 29%. A754 in theory is supposed to be a call. And on table number 1, I check call the flop, I think. And on the turn, I unfortunately have to let it go over pair. We don't block anything to the board. We also don't have a flush draw. It just is what it is. Let it go. Table number 2 is king jack 4. And a pretty good looking hand on table number 1, ace king 10, ace king jack 10. This is a squeeze. And table number 2, folding against a 3-bet will be the play. Let's see. My opponent in under the gun calls, and the other player calls as well. Very static board, where my default is to bet small. Like the reason to go small here is because if I bet, I have a lot of aces, right? And I try to sort of get value from kings, queens, jack-x. My opponents will not have 4x or better very often. So I'm in an advantage here. And ace-jack is a reasonable candidate to just bet and hope sort of to take the pot down immediately. Table number 2, open raising, which I think is okay. And against a 3-bet, might be a fold. Might be a fold against a 3-bet. And definitely folding against a pot size bet. Definitely folding against a pot size bet. Jack 9 7 7 defending the big blind 10 10 8. Checking back probably is the play. I would also, I think betting is reasonable because we are so connected to the board basically. And therefore, we sort of have indirect blockers to my opponent's like best made hands. I bet the turn. I will call a check raise unhappily. But I think we have to. And on the river, yes, folding is going to be the play. Ace queen 5-3 will be an open raise on table number 2. And I will like to see myself folding on table number 1. And on this flop, I bet, which I think is reasonable. I have an ace and I have a queen of hearts. So I have like decent blockers. And my hand doesn't play as great as a check. It's a good board for my range. The only downside is that this board is not super bad for my opponent. So we'll have to be a bit selective there as well. I decide on the turn to turn my hand into a bluff. Like at this point, I become like super polarized. Like I will bet like nut flushes and nut flush blockers and sometimes the queen of hearts. I think the reason why we can get away by betting the queen of hearts here as well is because my opponent is going to check raise the nut flush draw on the flop, I think, fairly often. And therefore, the amount of nuts that he has in his range at this point is not going to be super large, I would say. And therefore, I can allow myself to bluff a bit more often and put more pressure on his range. That's what I do. And my opponent will fold, which is great. Taking that one down. Ace 8 7 6 single. It is an it's a close spot. It's a close spot if I would have the option to raise, but I will have an easy fold there. Against the raise, table number 1, defending the big blind is standard, and on this flop against a large sizing, just check folding. Just check folding. Queen Jack 9-8, table number 2. And also Queen Jack 9-8 on table number 1. Look at that, look at that. Top 2 pair against a pot size bet. At this SPR, I'm just going to get it in, I would say. I could consider calling, seeing a safe turn first, but we do have a made hand, right? We do have a gutter. I will be ahead against a decent amount of my opponent's betting range. He's short, so let's just get it in. Unfortunately, my opponent hits on the turn with the flush. Let's pair the board with the queen. No. My opponent takes this down. He bets. Pot with ace, king, jack, 7. I don't know. I would like to see a check back there, probably. Because against a check raise, like, you're not super happy there. Yes, you can get it in because you have the nut flush draw, but you will have to improve. You will have to improve. 10 6 5 3 fold and ace jack 7 6 suited to the ace will be a defend in the big blind. Queen 8 deuce, check calling the flop. And on the queen, we have a pretty good candidate to bet, I would say. No showdown value, we have equity. The amount of queen X my opponent will have in his range is drastically reduced because he checks back the flop. So I can put a good amount of pressure on him. And luckily he folds. Queen jack 10 7 double, easy open. From middle position, or from the cutoff, sorry. And ace 10 9 7 single. Table number 1 is also interesting. 3 betting. Flopping top pair, table number 2, just check like we are 3-way. And table number 1, 3-bet pot, bottom 2 pair, checking, check call. This is not really a hand to bet and then get it in. It's just not strong enough on such a draw-heavy board. Beautiful turn with the 7, checking again. Giving my opponent room to bluff, basically. That's the idea. So we are check calling as well. If we raise, like, it's hard to get called by a flush even. So just checking, keeping his bluffs in. He doesn't decide to bet on the river. I mean, if you bet flop and bet turn, like, with so low showdown value and with the 9, I think he has a reasonable hand to barrel again. But unfortunately, he doesn't. King, queen, 8, 7, triple, table number 1. Yeah, I think open raising there is okay because if we look at all the VPIPs of the 3 players on my left, they're so tight that we can't get away by stealing. Let's see, let's see. Ace, king, 5, 4 single. Against the button raise, this will just be a call. And this is also going to be a call. This is also going to be a call. Ace king, not gutter, backdoor, not flush draw. Pretty close. Probably, I mean, might be a fold actually on the flop. Now on the turn, once we call, we cannot fold anymore. So we definitely have to make the call now. King 4, king 4. Sort of a block bet by my opponent. I mean, can we wrap ace jack? I don't think this is a great combo to pick from. Blocking 2 pair and also blocking the missed hearts. So this raising this one I don't love. My opponent will also still have jack 9 fairly often, I think. Which is not likely to bet and then fold, I think. So yeah, folding is probably just a play there. Ace 9 8 6 double, easy 3-bet. Beautiful ace high unpaired hand, connected. And my opponent actually folds. Taking it down pre-flop, not that bad. That is not that bad. And king 5 3 3 on the left. It's a loose open, but an okay open, I think, given the tight players on my left again. We're also double suited. And on table number 2, I like a fold. I like a fold against a 3-bet from the big blind after raising with a tight range. Table number 1. Check, check, flop. I think pretty standard with my hand. And on the turn, I mean, we could consider raising, but probably just calling with all the equity that we have with 2 flush draws. Like, if we raise and my opponent jams, it's pretty tricky. So I'd rather just, rather just call, see a river, realize my equity that way. And on this river, I have a very standard bluff. All the flush draws missed, even though I have them. I have a king. And my opponent at this point will have a very tough time calling down with anything weaker, basically, than a king-eye straight, which he will have plenty of in his range. Like straights, weaker straights, 2 pairs, sets, like all those hands, basically. And king, queen, jack, 9, triple on the right side. Nice hand to open raise with. Complete whiff on the flop. I will check. And on table number 1, we have a cash draw pot. Actually, there is 20 big blinds in the middle. That's great. That is amazing. And a beautiful flop. Top pair, nut flush draw, and an open ender. We are 4 ways. So I like a lead out here, absolutely. Like, we don't want to risk 2 players checking. Leading out anything from like 1/3 to half pot, I think is reasonable. Starting to build a pot, also give my opponents room to raise. Like in this instance. And he does raise full pot. So the money will go in here, obviously. No reason to do anything else than to shove. We get another player all in. Oh my god. Look at this beautiful pot, guys. We're up against a set of 9s. And a 6 high flush draw. That is pretty light. That is pretty light. Can we hold? Can we hold? Yes, we do. Beautiful. Beautiful hand. Beautiful hand. Against a set of 9s and jack 6, 5, 4. That's amazing. That's a great hand. That is a great hand, guys. And I think that's also a beautiful end of the session. Very long one again. Hope you guys did enjoy myself going over the hands that I played. If you did so, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel, guys. Also check out plomastermind.com if you want to learn more about pot limit Omaha. And other than that, guys, let's see each other in my next video. Over and out. See you in the next one.